I've been told there's about 44,000 barriers to people returning home from prison and jails in this country. So you can't begin to think about what any of them are. 44,000, that's an awful a lot of barriers. You know, just like simply from a person wanting to take their child to school and join the PTA. Can't do that in some jurisdictions. I could not get life insurance myself. And I'm like, well, why? Well, because you were in prison. I'm like, well, what does that have to do with now? Well, because of the conditions that you were once living in. I'm like, okay, well, I'm glad that you realized that you shouldn't put people in cages and that could also, you know, harm them as far as their health is concerned. Yet, if something happened to me, that burden would fall on my family because I can't have a life insurance policy. And went through all the major life insurance companies. I mean, outside of jobs, you know, we have policy that changes or employment. And yes, we removed the box on applications for employment, but people still consent to a background check. And so they'll get a conditional acceptance for employment, and then they'll work there. And then when the background check comes back, it's retracted. And then, you know, there's a cycle again. There's also voting. You know, I know there's some misinformation around voting depending state to state. When I was sentenced, and I was sentenced federally out of Virginia, in my plea, it said that I could no longer vote at all. Like my lifetime, it was taken away. When I got back to New York, in New York State, federally, and being on federal supervision, I could vote. Though my federal supervision officer didn't understand that. They told me I couldn't, but when I went on their website and talked to my attorney, I could. So there's a lot of misinformation about things that you can and cannot do. With the Small Business Association or starting businesses, I went to get a small business loan for a for-profit business I wanted to start when I came home, and they asked the question on that, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And I wanted to buy into a franchise. I said, why does that matter if I'm paying in, you know, into this business? If you had a conviction, they didn't even want to look at your application. So those are just some of the barriers that people overall have when they come home. I know for women specifically, again, it's, you know, getting their children back, reuniting with family. I didn't even talk about education applications for college applications or different other educational programs with, again, the checking of the box. When I look at in New York, if your children are under a certain age and different genders, you have to have separate bedrooms for them. So when you think about the likelihood for a mother in New York City who's recently returning home from prison, having a son and a daughter both under the age of 9, needing a 2-bedroom apartment because the daughter can stay with her, but the son has to have their own, how affordable is that when it's not affordable even to have a studio apartment in usually a safe community in New York City? So these are all the barriers.